Just to remind you about the New Beginnings process, last spring over 50 people participated in the New Beginning small groups, New Beginning feedback, and some of the things that we came up with are going to be really important for the future of the church. And through that process, we really were able to gain large-scale buy-in about some of the important next steps. One of the most important and possibly most challenging is to address our financial challenges. We've recognized, and the people who participated in New Beginnings have recognized that one of our key challenges have to do in the area of finances. For any of you who've been here for a while, you know that our expenses are well in excess of our offerings. And in part that's been because we've been able to do that because of a large endowment that we've relied upon. But we're coming to the recognition, or at least we're admitting now, that this is a serious area that if we're going to live into this new call, we need to address that. And so the rest of our time today is going to be focused on the steps that we're taking with regard to our financial challenges. Carl Mack, who is our elder for the Finance Committee, has really taken this call seriously. And so with the Finance Committee, they have undertaken a study of this problem and have presented a plan to Session, and Session has affirmed that plan. And today we want to let you know about that plan, and so we can begin that conversation. Before we do, I just want to, so the Finance Committee is going to talk about those details. As your pastor, I'm not going to be getting into the muck. I'm going to let others do that. But as your pastor, I also wanted to spend just a moment talking about how our call as Christ's disciples relates to finances. And the thing I want to most communicate to you today is that being a disciple of Jesus commits us to learning and practicing Jesus' way of life. I hope you all agree with me about that. Consequently, being a disciple commits us to thinking and talking about money. With the launch of New Beginnings, Jesus is now inviting us to think about our own finances and about our church finances in a new way. And here's the call: to trust Him anew, to put God and God's purposes first, and to boldly follow God's call. And this is true in all areas of our lives. And today we're going to focus on how that invitation applies to our finances. So I'd like to invite Wes Gilbert to come up and share more about the connection between New Beginnings and our finances.
I'm Wes Gilbert, a member of the Finance Committee and Worship Team. My wife Sarah and I have been coming here for years now, and we're truly excited to be part of the New Beginnings movement. We also feel there's something special about Chestnut Grove, and think of this church as our home. So for 6 weeks, over half of our active adult members met in small groups to review the same curriculum and guiding questions that determine the new beginning our church should seek. In the end, all groups came to the same consensus. 2 major findings emerged as being the most critical to the New Beginnings journey. Number 1, the recommendation was made to redefine the mission, as Andy alluded to earlier. Number 2, the recommendation was to address our financial challenges. Those were the 2 biggest points that we needed to make. Well, in my opinion, in order to accomplish number 1, redefining our mission, I think we must be realistic in addressing finances first, or at least simultaneously. You see, historically, we have been blessed by that endowment to be able to bridge the gap during difficult times. But the endowment will not last forever. As noted in the New Beginnings report by an external evaluator, as the endowment funds continue to decline, Chestnut Grove will need to either radically downsize its expenses or increase its income. At first, when we heard that, we felt rather discouraged and it seemed like a difficult challenge to tackle. However, after multiple meetings, lots of discussion and prayer, the financial team has come up with a plan. This plan that we think is attainable It's one that is positive and should give you hope. You'll hear more about the details of this solution momentarily from Skip, Diane, and Carl. In closing, I'd like to address 3 final points. Number 1, redefining our mission and addressing our finances both represent change. Change is something that most people are not comfortable with. In fact, we often avoid change. However, change is necessary, and that is the new beginnings that we all talk about. A fresh start. We have the exciting opportunity to embrace, how should I say this? We have the exciting opportunity to embrace these changes as a Chestnut Grove family, as a united body. It's a challenge to live into. It's a way for us to better our congregation sooner rather than later, and ultimately lead us to that why, as we discover our new mission. I challenge us all as we listen to the rest of our financial team to think about how we can come together to achieve those goals, and that's number 2. How might you specifically be encouraged to or inspired to take part in this movement? It's a collaborative effort, one that I hope and trust that we all can look back years from now to see the ways God worked here at Chestnut Grove. And 3, my third and final point, is a combination of 1 and 2. It's recognized that change is necessary. Number 2 is determining the next step each of us are willing to take, and collaboratively living into the challenges of 1 and 2 will put us in a financially stronger position and makes us more effective in our new mission as our church ultimately engages with, meets the needs of, extends God's love to our greater Jacksonville community.
Hi everyone, I'm Skip Flanagan. Most of you know me. I've been attending Chestnut Grove for 30 years with a brief 15-year gap in between. And as both Andy and Wes alluded to, the New Beginnings process really highlighted the need to look at our finances and to talk openly about them. And that can really be an uncomfortable process for us as individuals in our own lives, us as for any organization, and certainly for a church, where we sometimes feel like we need to focus on the spiritual element and not speak about the financial element. But in reality, and especially as Andy called out, they're intertwined, and the resources that we have are all gifts from God. So as we dove into this problem a little bit more, we had to do something a little bit uncomfortable that made us all even a little hesitant to, as we started this process, do it, and that was look at our financial history, what we've actually done. So it's very easy to be aspirational and say, yes, we're all going to come up to the plate here and do what we need to do, but it can be a little bit more uncomfortable looking back and saying, what does the recent past look like? What have we actually done? And so as we dove into the data, there was a little bit of hesitancy to see what we might find. I think everyone knew that we've been relying on the endowment and that was going to run out in sometime in the future. But once we got there, the results were actually really encouraging. And so don't be intimidated by all the numbers in the chart here. There's a couple of big takeaways that I want you to focus on. The history of the financial giving of the church. If you look back into towards the end of the last decade, where we, as a community, as a country, faced even beyond the borders, faced a really tough financial situation, the Great Recession, if you want to call it that. You can see that the green bars here is the average dollar amount pledged, but the total amount is also really dependent on the number of pledges. And so you see in 2006 and especially 2007, the number of people making pledges at Chestnut Grove was 70, 80 people. And then when the financial hardship began, that number dropped very rapidly. And that really was a point where things could have gone very, very poorly for the church. You hear a lot of terms about situations people get in and they're sort of self-sustaining. And as people saw the number of people attending church declining, number of pledges declining, it would have been very easy for a lot of people to say, I'm going to find a church where it's not so hard and where things maybe look a little bit better than this looks right today. And what you see is that didn't happen. The faithfulness of this congregation is tremendous, and not only the number of pledges start to to stabilize in 2009 and has been relatively stable for the last 7 years. But the amount pledged per person went up. The people in this room, the people that aren't here today, but they're faithful members of this church, they love Chestnut Grove, and they love this community, and they feel attached to it. And even in a time in our history where it wasn't entirely clear what the future held, there was overturning leadership within the church. There were members that came and left, and yet that average pledge kept going up, and it stayed at that higher level. And what that's allowed us to do is it's as a church, it has bought us at least a decade from where we were to figure out what we're doing and to figure out how to renew our spiritual life and renew our financial life, and it's allowed us to sit in this room today and have a reasonable discussion about what we do, and we'll let Diane get into the details in just a minute, what we do from here to grow into the church that we all want to be and that we all are on track to be now. But without this faithfulness, without that increase in that gift, the endowment would have been gone long ago. If those downward trends had continued, this room would be empty today. And that's not the case because of the faithfulness of the members of this congregation and the willingness to give the gifts from God to support the mission of the church. So we want to make sure that as we get into this plan, it doesn't come across at all as any sort of criticism or indictment of the past, or that, come on, why aren't you all giving more money? No, that's not what this is. And that has not been the case. And because of your financial gifts and your willingness to give of yourself, we're able to sit here today and plot the future of the church.
When Carl and Andy asked me this summer if I would try working on some projections showing how some different giving scenarios would affect our operating budget and thus the investment account balance, my initial reaction was, how on earth am I going to figure this out? And even a bit of, what's the use? Pretty sorry attitude I had. I knew that kind of negative attitude would not fly with Andy or Carl. So I, of course, said nothing and agreed to work on it, having no expectations at all as to what we would find out. But I think you're going to see that the results are very informative and pretty interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a few of the assumptions we made as we started out. And the first thing we did was started with the 2016 operating budget. Mostly to try to keep things simple. We already had the 2016 operating budget, and it was very similar to the 2015 operating budget and the 2015 actual results. So that is our starting point. And the expense total that we're using as in these projections assumes that we maintain our current programs and our current level of staffing with no increase in any operating expenses except for a 2% annual increase in our personnel costs. And our personnel expenses for this year represent just over 60% of our total operating budget. We assumed a 5% rate of return on our endowment funds in the investment accounts, and that is the average rate of return that we've gotten at Janney Montgomery Scott since they started managing the investments, which is more than 10 years ago. And that rate is net of the fees that we paid Janney Montgomery. And finally, the church has several sources of income, the biggest being congregational giving. So we kept all of the income levels the same, with the exception of congregational giving, and that's the variable that we adjusted in each of these scenarios that I'm going to show you next. So the first scenario, which basically represents no change in giving year over year. There's a modest increase in congregational giving in this projection, about $5,200 a year, which I think is fairly close to our recent giving trends. So you can see the bottom line is income, horizontal line. The top one is expenses. And in this case, our operating deficit just continues out pretty much at about $115,000. The brown line coming down is an estimate, obviously, of our balance in the investment account at the end of each year. So this year we're projecting we have about $625,000 in our endowment at the end of this year. And you see that in this case, by 2023, those funds would be gone. So that's pretty grim. Our next projection says, well, let's say everybody gives 2.5% more each year. This would be our members and other participants who give regularly. And we say, okay, let's also say we're getting 3 new giving units or families a year. And in this projection, the estimate for them is that they're giving about $125 total per week, the new families, which averages about $42 a week. So here you can see that the bottom line income is a little bit steeper. The expense line, we're holding everything the same, except the personnel expense is going up 2%, but it's the same as in the prior projection. And in this case, you can see that our investment account funds are down to $100,000 by 2023, and they would be gone by 2026. It was surprising to me that this scenario is not that different from the first. Stunning, really, and scary. So during the process of thinking about all this, the Finance Committee was coming face to face with the question of whether there could possibly be any reasonable level of increased giving that would allow us to continue our programs and staffing level into the future. So let's look at a last projection. It shows the impact of a 7.5% increase in giving every year by our existing members and participants, with the addition of 4 new giving units or families added each year. And the assumption for those 4 new families is about $140 a week total, which averages about $35 a week. And in this one, you can see here, the income line is steeper still. The expense line has stayed the same. But look at the investment account balance. It reaches a low in 5 years at the end of 2021, and then it actually starts to turn around after that. In this scenario, the budget would actually be balanced in 2023. Okay, this is stunning and scary again, but maybe in a different way. There is hope. There is a way for us to turn this around. It will take all of us, the entire congregation, members who make pledges, members who don't make pledges. We have participants who come regularly, who give regularly. It would take them too. All of us pulling together for several years would make a big difference. So in closing what I had to say, I just encourage all of us to keep talking about this, thinking about this, and praying about this. Maybe we'll have to make some sacrifices to give more financially to Chestnut Grove. Maybe we will have to adjust our priorities as families. Most likely we will. But I think we can do it with the knowledge that there's hope and that we can indeed make a change here to reverse the trend of far too many years. And wouldn't it be wonderful to start putting these financial stresses and concerns behind us and really putting our efforts and energies and faith in other things that are way, way more important. Thank you.
So it appears to me, having studied this now for the last year and a half, that we have a real opportunity which has not actually existed until this time. And that is, we have a chance to balance this budget in somewhere between 3 to 6 years. Somewhere. The plan calls for additional giving, but it also counts on something that we can't control, something that is in God's hands, and that is that new people will come in. And I believe that the plan of the New Beginning to reach out to the community is making the difference. After all, we're seeing new people come all the time. And I do not think that the addition of 4 new givers a year is an outlandish assumption at all. Well, what does the increase actually amount to? Well, in asking for an increase of 7.5% for each giver, there would be an increase for those who give $1,000 each year of $75. That is, on a weekly basis, a little less than $1.50 a week. So if you give $4,000 a year, it's 4 times that much. Okay? But we were charged with creating a plan which would work this problem out within 3 to 5 years, and which would be affordable and reasonable for our people. Therefore, we need to approach the problem in a systematic, managed way, and that requires a series of years in which we increase our giving. And so my feeling is that I am the most optimistic that I have been in perhaps 20 years. I can see that there is an end to this problem.
I'd like to thank Carl for leading the Finance Committee to get us to this point, and Diane, as well as the other members. Could we just offer our thanks to them? So, as you can see, the plan calls for some increased participation. And for those of you for whom this request of considering a 7.5% increase in your giving over each year over the next few years, I expect that you're responding to that in various ways. Some of you may be responding to that thinking, oh wow, that's amazing, that's all? That's all I need to do, and then if we all do it together, we'll get there. Others of you are thinking, oh my gosh, are they crazy? Or somewhere in between. That's okay. So that's partly why we're having this conversation now, to begin the dialogue. As Carl's mentioned, he and other members of the Finance Committee, as well as Session, are available to talk with you about this. So with this, you will be getting a letter for our stewardship campaign that will ask you to consider a percentage increase over last year. I ask that you prayerfully consider that request, knowing that all together, as we work together, God will be working the miracles through us that we cannot foresee. That's all I have. Again, thank you for your attention. Feel free to have, boy, there's some more dessert, So stick around, enjoy this day, and God bless you as you go.